Salutations, ghouls and freaks. Welcome to this podcast of Storm, where insane slashers, undead blood drinkers, and all around crooked beans convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Mage of Madness, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening.
And I am your host slash Scarecrow impersonator, the Brains from Pop Culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I am doing okay. My kitten still remains the most adorable thing ever. Um,
I feel like you gotta
although
post photos of that at some point on Twitter or something.
if my phone worked for 5 seconds out of its charger, I could do that. But I can't angle it to take a picture of him and keep it so that it stays charging. So that will have to be once I get a new phone. I do have some pictures of him though that I can send to you that other people have taken.
Well, if anyone knows who is my icon this week, I'm sure you can guess what our theme is. Don, would you like to take a stab at it?
um, is that Carmilla?
No. Close, though.
It's too small for me to
Hold
see.
on. Let me. Okay. Okay, I thought I was going to make the icon bigger. Never mind. Oh, you know what? Hold on. I think I got it. There we go.
Um, um, is that the version of Alphabet from Nocturne?
No. Okay, get one more guess.
I'm trying to. No, I can't. I can't see it well enough. Fuck.
Okay, let me. Hold on. Sorry, I didn't know what. Anything?
No.
You were close. It is in Castlevania. This is the original depiction of Vlad Tepes Dracula from the Castlevania games.
Mm.
He didn't have black hair.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say you disappoint me, Don, because I don't think the Castlevania games are really up to your speed.
The lore of them is very interesting, and the side scroller gameplay is always nice because I am a retro gamer, insofar as I am a gamer at all.
You just don't have
Um,
the hand-eye coordination for it.
yep, because cerebral palsy is a son of a bitch in so many little annoying ways, and that is one of them.
All right. Okay. Yeah, so this week is Vampire Week. It was a little tougher.
We do not drink wine. Sorry, had to be done.
Is that a reference to something? Or
In Bram Stoker's original Dracula, one of the first things Dracula says to Jonathan Harker, because he's welcoming him to his castle, as you do, and
Don, I haven't read it. You are aware of that, right?
I'm gonna have to get you the Great Illustrated Classics or something for Christmas, sir. That's it.
Look, I'm
This needs to be resolved.
okay. To be fair, I also haven't read Frankenstein itself. I've looked into it, but I've never been able to really.
It's dense. That's why if I was going to get you into them, I would get you the Great Illustrated Classics version because it's
I'm gonna
still
say like, maybe I should just get
still
an.
well it's still well written, but it's not written in 19th century English.
Right.
Actually, there's an old series of comics called the Classics Illustrated Comics that might work.
So yeah, I will admit it was a little harder for us to find stuff. for this week for theming.
I did, however, find plenty of people trying to appropriate vampire imagery and mythology for their own political ends, because of course I fucking did.
And
You know, someday I hope we find that nobody tries this kind of bullshit on Halloween or Christmas or whenever, but like it seems like for as long as there will be these holidays, someone will try to moralistically and politically appropriate them for their own ends.
right.
And we will be here to fucking rebut them with vigor and
So
flames if necessary.
over exaggerating, but yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do what we did last week, which is obviously do our what is it called again, Dalton?
Monster Mash Graveyard Smash.
Or pass. Well, no, it's very much Smash.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know why we ever called them Smash Passes because they were never.
I think because that was the original thing you decided to call them, and we just altered the format because after a certain point it got annoying to say that someone on one person's list wouldn't be on the other by virtue of the fact that you're a straight dude and I am very much not.
You're bisexual, but yeah, that's.
I very rarely, if ever, find females physically attractive. I find I get more attracted to women's personalities than anything.
Well, that's good. Anyway, heads or tails?
Heads.
Why is it okay? Why do you always do heads?
Because that's just the default I always choose for when you flip a coin.
I don't know. It's just I feel like sometimes you can mix it up. But all right,
I don't usually.
that's why I brought it up because over the last 5 or so years that we have been doing this.
Yeah, I usually pick heads because of the way people normally flip a coin is to flip it up into the air and then smash it down onto their hand when it's done flipping. That usually winds up resulting in a head because someone usually winds up flipping it up when the head is already showing. So when they flip it up over, that puts the tails in their hand right before they flip it back over, and thus usually it's heads.
Okay, well I don't flip the coin. I just spin it on my desk and then slam on it.
It's strange that your coin flips still operate that way then.
Yeah, I don't get it either. I mean, sometimes I get tails, but sometimes tails happens. But
anyway, to paraphrase the Ed Wood meme Bela Lugosi, flip the coin.
I already did. And you're first, so let me get you number 5 up.
Yeah.
Do you have like some weird luck thing added to yourself? Like,
not that I'm aware. Long since have I stopped using that kind of probability magic because it got too addictive, and I had to physically stop myself from using it.
Are you sure you're not passively doing it?
I'm fairly certain. Magic is not something that I can usually do passively.
I'm just saying, like, every time we've done a flip, it's been often more times in your or a spin in this case, in actuality, but it always seems to be more in your favor.
I don't know.
You really might.
Whatever luck I have that might be unnatural, I'm crediting it to Mab, because when in doubt, I am going to credit it to the supernatural entity that I work with the most closely, and it's never bad manners to pay one's queen a compliment in absence of other evidence.
Fair enough, I suppose. Anyway, you're number 5.
Yes, my number 5 is Victor Walker, aka Victor Everblood, from the Pocket FM story, My Three Wives Are Beautiful Vampires. The reason why he's only number 5 is because I haven't really read much of the story in question. I normally just end up replaying the first prologue part of it because it basically features Victor having kind of a mirror scene from Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man moment, where he realizes that the vampirism has made him essentially superhuman, and in the course of the beginning of the story, he seems very much like it's he does very much seem like the stereotypical Tobey Maguire Spider-Man kind of vibe. Knowing what I know about these kind of audio stories, I suspect he goes on a darker turn later when, the power goes to his head a bit, and that's why he's number 5. But at least the portion of his character that I'm the most familiar with, which is in the prologue part, he seems like a perfectly nice guy, and added bonus, he doesn't drink male blood, so I would also be safe around him. So that's also nice. But that's why he's number 5, because normally in these kind of stories there's a dark twist at the end, and I don't like dark twists. But
don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, can I add anecdote to your comment about the biting?
Mm-hmm.
I highly doubt you're not into that.
Not when it's a vampire doing it, because that risks me contracting vampirism, and I don't want to be a vampire.
Okay, so how I've understood vampirism, just a little tangent here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've always understood that when someone bites you, it's less the actual bite itself and more the intent of the bite, influenced by the soul, so to speak, of the vampire. Like if he wants to turn you into a vampire.
Sometimes that's how it works, but sometimes not, and thus is the precaution.
Okay, I'm just saying, to be fair, I would prefer that to be the more standard rather than it just being effectively like a zombie bite. That's fucking stupid, in my opinion.
The other way I've seen it done is a vampire, in order to change you, has to both bite you and let you drink from their own blood.
Yeah, I am aware of that one too. I think that actually might be the more common one, to be fair.
If that's how it works, then I'm fine with biting. I just don't want to contract vampirism because I don't want to be a vampire. Despite the fact that I would probably make a pretty good one, because I already do the quasi-aristocrat thing already, and of course, already of course a lot of background in sorcery and so forth.
Okay,
but I don't want to be a vampire.
I do want to point this out, on. I guess the question would be, would the vampirism heal your cerebral palsy and basically turn you into a human, or would you still be a vampire with cerebral palsy?
Well, yeah, I don't particularly care one way or the other about the CP, but I don't really want the vampire speed or strength. That's the main reason why I would not want to be bitten by a vampire.
Yeah, don't. But I'm just saying. Think about it. If you were immortal,
most of their other abilities I have no problem with, but the speed and strength thing is not something I want. So
I think it also depends on the. To be fair, it also depends because, if I understand,
what kind of vampire in what universe are we playing?
Yeah, because some vampires don't even have. Yeah, some vampires don't even have super strength or super speed.
Mm-hmm.
They do have abilities though, but I'm not.
Yeah, the sorceress abilities of a vampire I wouldn't mind having, because again, I already, and this was one of the main things that prevented me from making this list for a lot of weight. And I think I've explained it on stream before, but I will explain it again for clarity's sake. The reason why I had such a hard time finding vampires that I would find attractive is because, generally speaking, in romance novels, there's a dichotomy between the beast male and the noble male, and that dichotomy that starts in romance novels maps on really well to the werewolf vampire dichotomy, and as a result, I find I have much more in common with most vampires in fiction. But that very same thing I have in common with them also makes them terminally unattractive to me because I'm looking for my opposite to balance myself out with, not an extension of myself. As a result, however, of this aforesaid parallel dichotomy between the beast male and the noble male and the werewolf and vampire, Werewolf Week is going to be hilariously easy because the absence of himbodom in vampire kind mostly means that all my himbos are in a different monster type, so to speak.
Right.
And so when we get to Werewolf Week, I will have the easiest cakewalk in the history of these Smasher Pass.
Anyway, moving on, or do you have anything else to say about your 5? Or
Yeah, go ahead.
okay,
Your number 5, sir.
yeah, give me 1 sec. Okay. Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil. I think it's 7. No, 8 Village.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of cheating on this one because she's technically not a vampire. It's like like how a lot of monsters in Resident Evil are more like biomutated people.
Mm-hmm.
But
It's kind of like how a zombie should be the result of necromancy, but most often is the result of a virus or some kind of nuke bullshit.
yeah.
Or,
So she was one of the main characters like villains advertised in Resident Evil Village, even though she's not the main villain.
mm-hmm.
She has a very vampire aesthetic. Like she lives in a castle that's very ornate, decorate. She has 3 daughters that are vampiric, even though their corpses made of flies.
Why is she only number 5 on the list?
Because she's an evil bitch and also a man hater. But aesthetically, she does tick certain boxes for me. Shut the fuck up.
You know what you did. I don't even have to say anything. You know what you did.
Okay, shut the fuck up. Again, like I said, aesthetically, like if you see the photo here, she has very classy, very upper class style. I believe.
So you're saying if I was a girl and also a vampire?
No.
Sorry.
The
way you were describing her was like, I'm now imagining a gender flipped version of myself, and you somehow getting along really well there.
Right.
Oh, dear God.
She also apparently had a music career in the 1930s. She was born in 1914 in the jazz scene. So, and I like jazz and blues music. So, that's a point there. She is also. Shut the fuck up, Dawn. I'm saying this preemptively. She is 9 feet 6 inches tall.
If I was playing Brainstormer Bingo, this would be the precise moment I would be yelling bingo. I will, however, not say anything further because he knows what he did.
Okay, like you don't. Okay, like no one does. Okay, like no one likes to have a partner taller than them. Fuck off.
I'm not saying that. I am just saying that I have known you for many, many years, and this very much does not surprise me because you know what you did.
Okay.
Although oddly enough, it usually is a little bit weird for straight guys to prefer girls taller than them. Normally, the way it goes with straight couples is taller guy, shorter, more feminine girl. But then again, you also like your tough chicks and your warrior women and Amazons and so on. So there's that.
Also, and I'm going to be a little crude with this. To be fair, I do think that, okay, before I say this, I do think there has kind of been a breaking of that stigma recently within my generation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but speaking as yourself, Dalton, who would probably prefer a taller partner,
1,000 times out of 1,000, yes.
yeah. Would you not like to climb that tree?
Again, not disputing your reasoning. I am remarking upon this as your best friend who knows you very, very well, often better than you know yourself in some cases, and thus you know what you did.
Shut the fuck up. Anyway, you're number 4.
Yes.
There we go. I'm gonna be honest. I was surprised on this one.
You were surprised. You were surprised Matthew Claremont from Discovery of Witches made it.
Yeah, because it's a relatively new one. I saw a clip of this like about a year or so ago.
Yeah, I read the first book. I have yet to find the
Others,
other books on audiobook. But I read the first book and I knew that the show was a thing, and I got the show for uh in box set form for Christmas last year. Um, he's a lot more physically imposing in the book than he is on the show, and I am kind of disappointed about that. Um, and yes, he is somewhat loose when it comes to my type because again there just aren't enough himbo vampires is the problem. There aren't enough muscle bound himbo vampires, so I'm having to make do a little bit here. But short version is he was much more physically imposing in the book. But that being said, I'm not entirely against the idea of a like literature professor as a significant other. I generally prefer if my significant others are slightly stupider than me because that makes me feel like I can actually offer them something and be needed. But he's a nice guy. He has rules with regards to who he will and will not drink, and he was a lot more physically imposing in the book. Shame on the casting department for the show not going for someone more akin to the book version, but eh. Also, he and the female main character of Discovery of Witches, Diana Bishop, meet because he is looking for a grimoire that her family put a spell on, that's supposed to um, detail the common origins of vampires, demons, and witches. So not only is that something that I would most definitely do, but it makes the idea of us being together a lot more plausible, which means I have to do a lot less headcanoning, which is always nice. Anyway, you're number 4, sir.
Yep. All right, give me one sec. This might not be a shock. Though when I think I told Dawn, she was a little shocked. Lenore from Castlevania. Netflix's Castlevania.
I wasn't necessarily shocked. I just, knowing what Lenore does to Hector, we might be entering quasi Azula territory again. And by the way, if she ever does the fucking slave ring thing to you like she does to Hector, I'm gonna have to go full Sypha on a bitch. Is what that's going to be. I know she's nicer than all the other vampire sisters in Styria, but if she tries to do the forced like marriage rape thing that she does to Hector, I'm going full Siphon of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's why she's number 4. That whole thing. But other than that, like even after that, she seems very kind
Yeah,
and
no, she and Hector make for a good couple. I just can't get over the forceful magical marriage enslavement thing. So if she pulls that shit on you, then bitch is going to be staked out in the sun, and I'm going to watch her as she slowly burns. But that's me being protective again, similar to my standard with Azula. If Azula does anything Azula like to you, I will bloodbend a bitch. And if Lenore does the forceful marriage
so.
enslavement
Can
rape
I
thing
actually
to you,
describe why I like why she's on my list?
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Like I was saying, other than what Dolan had said, she does seem like a very kind, attentive, and very like, nice partner. Obviously, she's a vampire, so she's very much manipulative.
Okay, this is a question I guess we should address. I already kind of addressed it in my number 5. Would you want her to turn you in the hypothetical where you guys were together?
Be fair, okay. So I have thought about myself as a vampire, and I honestly would have to say no because as a vampire, it does seem like your inhibitions or like your kind of more, how to say,
Your default personality gets scaled up a bit. It seems to be, at
that's
least in the Castlevania anime, that whatever your default setting is as a human becomes a portion of your vampire addiction.
okay. See, that's where I am somewhat terrified because look, I'm gonna be fully honest with you.
Because your writing instinct is probably what would get magnified.
No, 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 no.
Brainstormer as a
Elton, can I?
vampire offer. Sorry. Sorry.
Okay, I'm gonna be fully honest. The persona that you guys have seen pretty much all the years I've been here has been a carefully constructed, idealized version of myself. When in actuality, I have a lot of boiling rage, hatred, and just downright destructiveness inside me that I've buried. And that is the part of me I am very much terrified of coming to the surface as a monster in any form. Because I'm not gonna lie, if I was made a vampire and that part of me came out, I would be fucking worse than Dracula in Castlevania. So much worse.
Especially because you would probably have a Forge Master friend, who would probably encourage you down that road a little bit, not gonna lie.
I wouldn't even use you. I would just do I would literally do all of it with my bare hands.
That vampires can't do Forge Mastering. That was a whole plot point.
No, I wouldn't even ask you to do it. What I mean is, I would go on a slaughter spree across Europe or wherever,
So sort of like in the flashback in season 2 when the town offends him.
but times 100.
No, that's not yours. Go lay down, dog. God damn it. Sorry. I think you might be overestimating your bloodthirst a little bit there, my friend.
I think you very much underestimate the kind of darkness that's in me, man.
Well, okay, but here's the thing though. You restrain yourself from that as a human. And we've seen with Lenore and with Dracula and with several of the other vampires in Castlevania that it doesn't change your personality that much. So if you restrain yourself from that impulse as a human, there's an argument to be made that you might even get more restrained as a vampire, because again, whatever your like default obsession is as a human, for Dracula it's acquiring knowledge, for Lenore it's diplomacy and peacemaking, for Carmilla it's being a man-hating bitch. um I'm trying to think. For Striga it's combat, for Mirana it's intellectualism and strategy, and so on.
Again,
I,
man, I just look
I
honestly. Here's how I also see it. If I'm a vampire, I'm not gonna give a shit anymore about holding back or anything like that. Because I'm fucking done with everything at that point. I got nothing left to lose, so I'm letting go. I'm letting loose all the fucking time.
Fair enough. I don't quite believe you because I know you too well, but fair enough.
You have no idea how much I want to do that. If I really get the chance, I will fucking take it.
Fair enough. And in that event, would you prefer that I kill you?
I don't think you would, is the thing. Even if I wanted you to,
Well,
you
I
wouldn't.
would do my best to honor your wishes, which is why I'm asking. Would you prefer that I kill you if you
Yes,
become a vampire?
yes, but then again, you're my best friend. I don't think you would find the courage nor the heart to do it.
I would do it in memory of who you are now, because I wouldn't want to see you become what you fear becoming as a vampire. I personally think that you wouldn't. The part of you that would get amplified most likely would be your writing impulse, and so you'd be an ancient vampire author. But if you showed those darker tendencies that you're worried about, I would kill you out of love for you, because that's what you wanted. It seems like somewhat of a waste to me, yes, but I would honor our friendship, because otherwise I would be an even worse piece of shit than I already am, and I don't even want to contemplate being that shitty. So, out of love for you, I would kill you if that's what you wanted. In the event that your vampirism amplified your anger rather than your writing impulse, which
But also,
again
I
would be
do want to be. Okay,
would be my gambit for you.
another reason why I wouldn't want to be a vampire, I'd never see the sun again.
Yeah, I can see why that would be a problem for you. I'm already a nocturnal son of a bitch with a weird sleep cycle. So again, me as a vampire would be a very easy transition in the Castlevania universe, it seems.
To be fair, I would just like to see. Yeah, I would like to see a sunrise without feeling dread.
Sorry, the dog is being a cunt.
Can you close the door?
He's not in my room. He was the the cat dish is right outside my door. Is where the cat dish is.
Okay.
Anyway, my number 3.
Yeah. I just found a lot of art for this dude, so.
Yes, I am not. I am not surprised. The Dresden File fandom is very, very intense in their fandom. Which, to be fair, given how forcefully I insist that you partake in Dresden Files, does not surprise me.
Right.
But yes, Thomas Wraith. For brainstormers' benefit, mostly, I will go through how vampires work in the Dresden verse. There are four different kinds of vampire that we know of. There is the Black Court, which are your stereotypical Bram Stoker Draculas. There is the Red Court, which are like what bats would look like if they were designed by H.R. Geiger, essentially, is the best way I can describe how the Red Court looks. And their thing is they have a narcotic saliva that's like super addictive opium to the people they feed on, and they hide their H.R. Geiger bat form in what's called a flesh mask, which allows them to, on the surface, look human, but it's literally only skin deep. It is literally an H.R. Geiger bat wearing a skin suit, and they dominate South America because it's at least heavily implied that the Red Court of Vampires was born from the like Mayan and Aztec gods, and or pretended to be said Aztec gods. And then the third is the White Court of Vampires, who are life force vampires. And each family in the White Court of Vampires feeds on a different kind of life energy. For the Skavis, they feed off despair, depression, and suicidal ideation. For the Malvora, they feed off fear and adrenaline. And for the Wraith, they feed off of lust. Enter Thomas Wraith, who is a White Court vampire who doesn't really like being a White Court vampire most of the time, and thus, while other White Court vampires will just eat people whole, so to speak, like literally orgasm them to death, Thomas doesn't. He likes to, he refers to it as nibbling. So if I had to get fed on by any member of the White Court, I'm going with Thomas. And the White Court are the most desirable of the vampire types in the Dresdenverse. The fourth type is the Jade Court, and we don't really know much about them because they only get mentioned once in Book 5 of the Dresden Files, although we can assume they're probably the Chinese hopping vampires.
Jinyang?
The Zhengshi, I believe, is how it's pronounced. But yes, we haven't seen much of the Jade Court because apparently they're very small and very private, and Chicago doesn't have a Chinatown that I'm aware of, or at least they've never focused on it. But yeah, of the various vampire types, the White Court is probably the least bad and the most human-like. And of the White Court, obviously the Wraiths are the preferable ones. And of the Wraiths, Thomas, who is actually Harry's half-brother, spoiler,
No.
is the most ethical of the White Court vampires. And I honestly wouldn't mind getting life force nibbled, because the other thing about the White Court vampires is they all look as physically attractive as possible as part of their vampirism. So Thomas kind of resembles Henry Cavill, and I wouldn't say no, is what I'm saying.
There is a Chinatown in Chicago.
Then I'm annoyed at Jim Butcher for never bringing the Jade Court up as it relates to Dresden Files, except for the one time in Death Masks.
Anything else?
Assuming that the Jade Court is still around, because it's possible they don't exist anymore, because the information war against the various kinds of vampires is a running theme in Dresden Files. Like, for example, the Black Court all but vanished once Bram Stoker's Dracula was published, because the White Council of Wizards and the White Court of Vampires published Bram Stoker's Dracula specifically as a how to kill Black Court vampires manual for normies. And so the only remaining Black Court vampires are the most dangerous, skilled, and powerful ones that were able to keep themselves safe from the Van Helsing, essentially.
All right. Number 3 then, or anything else?
Yep. Go ahead.
My number 3 is Draculaura from Monster High, first generation. How do I will admit, this one's kind of out left field in terms of like vampires I would be into.
Mm-hmm.
because she's very girly, very cutesy, and all that.
But nostalgia, etc.
Well, she's nice, and uh, very sweet, very caring. She does have a boyfriend, Claude Wolf, who is a werewolf.
Ooh boy, I bet that made Dracula happy that his daughter is
She is a. She also doesn't eat blood. She doesn't like blood.
okay. How does she substitute blood? I'm curious now.
I believe. Hold on. I think it is mentioned. Hold on. It was a funny thing I remember. But hold on. Yeah, it's loading. Biological. Oh no, she's not the. Huh. So she was. She's the biological daughter of Camilla and Gaius.
Ah, so not Dracula's daughter for once.
Born 412 AD. Did not know this.
Whew. She is much older than she looks.
Uh, it so happens that Gaius, a Roman soldier, is the great great grandson of Trajan, one of Dracula's servants and friends. Hmm. Oh, her name given as an honor to Dracula saved both her and her mother's lives. Okay.
The lore of Monster High is slightly darker than I expected.
I'm just now finding out about this, to be fair. Hey, Giant Turtle. It's catching up. Okay. Okay, Dracula Riot. Okay, uh, Plague invades. Okay, so, yeah, Dracula, her mom dies during the plague, but Dracula is turned into a vampire to be saved from the plague.
Okay.
She's vegan, right?
Okay, but in what sense? I'm still confused as to how she.
Arranges her own food from her vegetable garden. Dracula will faint when seeing meat in front of her.
Okay, but that still raises like quasi physiological or I guess metaphysiological questions about vampires in this universe. It's an interesting character thing, but I'm still wondering how she hasn't gone feral with hunger at this point yet.
I don't know. But yeah, she's very like I said, she's very sweet, very kind, energetic, ecstatic. Um, just I guess I'm just again, there are not many vampire ladies that really fit my criteria.
I
But
think I think it's kind of the flip side of my issue with it because vampires always or almost always read as aristocratic. That would mean that their women are almost always very hyper feminine and girly, and that's not usually your thing.
yeah, but no, Dracula is a cool and sweet. Like I said, like she's just okay. Given my personality, which isn't as like I'm an optimist, but I'm very like quiet, very reserved, very um
You're an optimist with severe traumas, is the thing.
Thank you, Dalton. So I think having a partner that is very much the opposite of me, very outgoing, very energetic, um, that kind of lifts the thing off my back of I have to be the one to be very engaged in a social situation.
Mhm.
Because fucking Christ, that is such pain in the ass that I have to be the one to be constantly the first to be social. Like fuck. I'm sorry that happens to me a lot.
I mean, I'm kind of in that same boat, dude. That's why most of my picks are extreme extroverts with himbo golden retriever energy, essentially.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's almost always better to find someone who can balance you and cover your deficiencies as you can cover theirs. That whole rigmarole.
Giant turtle, rain turtle, and its werewolf week holding a newspaper over Dalton to keep it SFW.
I am not making any promises, and I was never expecting to have to make any promises to this regard. We're already this deep into monster fucker kinkery. I'm not making I am not making any promises, and nor is
Anyway,
Brainstormer.
I mean, I keep mine SFW mostly.
To be fair, I think most of the ones on my list are safe for work. I I guess it would depend on how prudish your safe for work standards are.
Fair enough. Anyway, you're two.
Yes. Auroch from
Uh,
Castlevania Nocturne.
it's Old Rocks, actually.
Um,
There's an L there.
yeah, Orlok rather.
No,
From
Old Rocks. Old Rocks.
from Castlevania Nocturne. I was originally gonna put Alucard here,
Too feminine.
but well, yeah, he reads as almost elven despite being a Dhampir a lot of the time, and that's just there. Like with most vampires, I would probably make an excellent vampire myself, and I would gladly have vampire friends, but most vampires are not romantic material. Orlox, however, or Olrox is a ancient Mesoamerican chieftain. I don't think we ever even get confirmation as to just how old he is.
Um, hold on. I'll look it up real quick, see if there was mention.
But for one thing, he is a gay vampire, or at least he's willing to have male lovers, because because throughout most of Castlevania Nocturne, he's trying to convince a highly devout, highly pious Templar named Mizrak
Actually,
to.
hold on. Sorry. What Mizrak is wearing is not the typical colors of a Templar. It would actually, I believe, he actually might be of the Knights Hospitaller, which was a subsect of the Knights Templar.
Yeah, but point being, he basically spends the entirety of season 1, at least, of Castlevania Nocturne trying to get Mizrak to come around, which is doubly difficult because A, gay, which is already an issue for a highly pious paladin of the church, and B, even if he was willing to accept his sexuality, vampire.
Oh,
So
okay, never mind. Knights of St. John.
yeah, but he does have a warrior aspect to him, and he is very old and
Uh,
powerful in vampire terms, and thus there's more meat on the bone for me with him than there would be for most vampires, even in the Castlevania franchise.
To be fair, and also he is like the best character in Castlevania Nocturne.
Yeah, he is by far and away the most interesting and complex and well-rounded character in
Okay,
the show.
so it's like you said, it's not specified, but there's a proclamation of his age.
Mhm.
Well, date of birth is to be either the 15th or 16th century, obviously.
Okay, he's younger than I thought then, because I
Well, when were the conquistador era?
that would that would have been the 15th century. I
Okay,
just thought he was significantly older than that because given that he can transform into a feathered serpent, my
you thought
read
he
on
might be
him my read on him was that he was an old was that he was one of those vampires that was quote unquote mistaken for a god or at least got his powers from one of the Mayan or Aztec deities. So I assumed he was several thousand years old.
yeah, around 270, 280 years old is the proclamation.
Yeah, he's a lot younger than I thought. Damn.
Okay.
But he's still probably the most overtly masculine vampire in the show.
Okay, no, I was
And
right. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I looked up Knights of St. John from Mizrak. It was
Mhm.
the order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, Knights
Mhm.
Hospitaller,
Yeah.
which that's interesting, actually.
Yeah. But yes, Orlok is
Old Rocks.
or Olrox is he's okay, and I wouldn't say no to him if he was to come on to me. The one of the reasons why he's lower than my number one is because he does seem to be fairly insistent on turning whoever he falls for, which in the Castlevania universe I wouldn't be quite as against because insofar as they do have the like physical strength and physical speed thing, it's a lot less overt and a lot less OP in the Castlevania vampires. Um, and there seems to be a lot more heavy focus on sorcery, which again, given that I'm already very much steeped in that lore, it wouldn't be a hard transition for me.
Right. Um, how is it that the side characters of the Castlevania series seem to be the best characters?
I
You
think
know,
just because they don't know what to do with the main characters, is the problem. I think there's more meat on the bones for people like Isaac and Hector than there is for Sypha and Trevor. I think they could have spaced it out a little bit better if they had made Trevor's um reluctance to help last a little bit longer. And then we could have had him kind of being conflicted of wanting to get out of the family business but still needing to be in it because he would rather
um,
die than not having stood up and fought for people and shit.
the answer to our question is: would Laura Wraith make Brainstormer's list?
I can pretty confidently say that when he gets to book 6 of the Dresden Files, the answer to that question will be yes, in great big flashing neon white letters. Um, but we shall see. Speaking of which, Brainstormer, Stormfront update, sir.
Uh, well, I'm a little past. Like I said, I've been busy with work and stuff, so I haven't been able to go. But I'm a little past the part where he faces the frog demon and is now getting accused by his warden.
Yeah, Morgan is being an asshole again, as
Yeah,
Morgan is what to do.
yeah.
And I'm assuming this is the scene in the like Mystic Bar, Max.
No. I guess before that, it's right, and it's still in the rain and stuff.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. Now I remember where. Morgan being an asshole is a reoccurring thing, so there are a lot of scenes of Morgan
I'm
being
getting
an
that with,
asshole.
I'm getting that with Morgan. He is kind of a fucking dick. Does he
To
ever
be,
get like his? Okay, no, don't get. So while I don't care about spoilers, just be vague about it. Yes or no? Uh, does he ever get a slap in his face effectively?
he and Harry eventually bury the hatchet in like 10 books.
God damn it!
He doesn't. He does. Okay, I'm not sure how to. Insofar as
Nah,
you're thinking
don't
in
tell me.
like comic terms, the answer is yes. Insofar as like story wise, no.
Okay, it's
But yeah, he and Harry finally bury the hatchet, and then it becomes irrelevant because reasons. But never mind.
I just really don't like the guy right now. Again, it's his first appearance, but he is a very unlikable
Oh
jackass.
no, that continues for the majority of the series. Like the book where he and Harry finally come to terms is book 11 out of 16 so far. So you're good. He continues to be an unlikable dickhead for the majority of proceedings.
Anyway, my number two, Mavis Dracula of Hotel Castlevania. Shut the fuck up.
I I
You would
did
think.
I What's hilarious is he can sense when I'm smiling, even when my screen is turned off. He can feel the like vulpine smile that I always have when I'm about to fucking when I'm about to fucking you know what you did at him. It goes to show just how close we are as friends that he can read my facial expression even when my camera is fucking turned off.
That tells you there was that quietness you had. That's a tell.
Point.
Yeah.
Fair
Uh,
point. Well made. Anyway, you're number two, Mavis, etc.
yeah. Well, one thing, the first Hotel Transylvania movie is actually really good. I don't know about the other. I've watched like the other two, like the.
They're okay, but it seems like Happy Madison had a lot more input over the sequels than Gendy did, and thus the one where Gendy had the most creative control is the good one because everything Happy Madison touches eventually turns to shite, and everything Gendy touches is almost always a classic. So naturally,
Oh,
one where
dude,
they're
did you
working
hear about?
together winds up being meeting in the
Hey,
middle.
dude, did you hear about the Sony passing on a movie by Genny Tartakovsky
I
recently?
did, I did. They're absolute cunts and morons, and my
Yeah.
god, why? But I did
Okay.
hear about it.
To answer your question, Rachel, I do things that help me get it out. It's more so like I'm not like it's not bottled up or anything. I don't do I try to make sure I'm not like in public or like near people when I get that kind of stuff out. You know, the rage and all that. So, but working out in martial arts, I have tried that. It does somewhat help, but I find just vocalizing a lot more does help me a lot better because it's just like when I'm alone or something, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you ever want to meet a significant other that would meet with your approval, I highly suggest taking martial art classes because you're likely to meet girls there who would probably meet your standards. I am once more pointing this out because I am your friend and I want to see you happy.
I also just don't have the time to do that because I'm busy at work, and after that, I'm just fucking tired for most of the day from work. So,
See if there are any classes that run on your day off or whatever the fuck.
on Saturdays, I have to prepare all this. So I'm practically busy all.
If you were to tell me we needed to move the show, I would not mind. It's your schedule which moved it to Saturday in the first place. I'm fairly wide open as long as I have enough warning ahead of time.
I don't know, man. Honestly, at this point, I've kind of just put searching for a significant other on hold until certain things that need to be done in my life are done.
Yep, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm pointing this out as your friend because I don't
Also, the
want you to
dating
be
scene is
lonely.
just. Also, the dating scene is just ultimately fucking trash at this point. So
A clusterfuck for the ages. Yes, fair enough.
anyway, Mavis Dracula. Again, it doesn't really technically match my criteria. Um, besides somewhat aesthetics, but she's not really tomboyish. She's very like sweet, very kind, very uh, just loving person. So,
Mhm.
which again, I think it's like it's just that juxtaposition to myself that I would kind of need in a partner. So, yeah.
I'm just now picturing you in Johnny's place in the first Hotel Transylvania, having to reason with Drac on this whole thing.
I mean, I probably do a lot of the similar stuff Johnny did. To be fair,
Mm-hmm.
because in the first movie, Johnny's actually like a very empathic, very smart, intelligent person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't really have too much to say on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let me hold on. Let me get the last ones up.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a surprising one because I've seen this so many times on so many of your other lists.
I don't know what to say. Emmett Cullen from the Twilight Saga. Again, my type, insofar as I have a type, is muscle-bound himbos with golden retriever energy, and there aren't that many of those vis-a-vis vampires. So he is the most quintessentially himbo-ish of the vampire characters that I am aware of, and I wanted to pad out the list with some more like ASMR characters and stuff, but the ASMR community for once let me down. There aren't enough himbo vampires in that part of the internet either, for shame. So this is the most himbo-ish of the vampires, therefore he is number one on my list, given that I go for most found himbo with the golden retriever energy. Also, his wife in the story is a bitch, and I think I could do better than her. So yes, that is my number one. The most himbo jock of all the vampire characters that I could find. And I looked. Like I sent this to Brainstormer like literally 4 hours ago because I was so desperately looking for any other examples of vampire characters who fit the like muscle bound himbo jock thing. But no, so I had to go with some of the obvious ones so that we could pad out the list. But again, like I said, come next week, come Werewolf Week, I will have a much easier time finding my himbos because the beast male and the noble male parallels perfectly well with the werewolf vampire dichotomy. So,
My number one,
yep.
Celine from the Underworld series. Shut the fuck up.
Yep. You know what you did. All I'm gonna say.
I
You know what you
know.
did.
You don't have to point it out every fucking time, though. We both know.
Don't I? Don't I?
No, you really fucking don't. You smug motherfucker.
Oh, who can sass you better than one of your best friends?
My family. Although that's not really sassing.
Hence, I reiterate the question: is there anyone in your life who knows how to sass you better than me?
I'm gonna go with no, but that's because I don't really deal with a lot of people sassing me. So anyway, she might actually be the only one on this list that actually does fit my criteria for my desired partner. She's tough, a badass, uh, warrior, or in this case, known as a death dealer, I believe. But there's also like a heart under there, you know. Um, she's very much someone who does care for stuff, but obviously because of life she has lived, uh, is closed off for several reasons. Um, again, something I can relate to, but sorry, on there. Um, and I just think she's very well, she's very cool. I guess is the best way I can put it. And yes, that is a major factor in what I find attractive. Shut the fuck up.
I'm just saying when you get deeper into Dresden Files, we're gonna have to make an entire Dresden Files centric Smasher Pass list.
I think you just want more of an excuse to talk about the Dresden Files.
That is incidental, but more to the point. There are entire swathes of female characters that you, sir, are going to fall for head over fucking heels, and Dragon Turtle can back me up on this one. Like, I can think of 5 of them off the top of my head. And yes, I can also think of 5 guys that I could see myself falling for because Jim Butcher, despite what the feminazi critical theory twats say, he's just as iconic and just as archetypical when he describes male characters. They just don't notice or fucking care because they're too busy thinking of homosexualization as victimhood bullshit. But there are plenty of male characters in the Dresdenverse that would also get it in my estimation. It's just Brainstormer's particular criteria being what they are. He's going to have, again, we're going to have one of these Valentine's days or Februarys, we're going to have to do a Dresden Files centric Smasher Pass list when Brainstormer gets more cut up. Anyway, moving to the next of the topics.
Okay, so I'm gonna hold off just because I think for time purposes, we should do the pitch thing a little later
Okay.
in case we can't make it to the video I had in mind for the positive. But
Right.
it always
So
seems like we trade so much in, we always leave one out. So
right. So articles next then.
yeah. So this is filmsforaction.org. This was originally published August 7th, 2018. It's written by Pat Mosley. Before and after I became a social justice vampire.
Yes, this article exists. No, I don't know why we didn't cover it back then. I guess because we weren't looking for vampire specific stuff.
It was 2018 too, so like about two years roughly.
Well, yeah, like a year and a half before we started the show, because we started the show first week of March 2019. I believe it was March 3rd originally, but I always just chalk it up to the first podcast day in March is when we celebrate the anniversary. But anyway, moving on to the stupidity that I'm sure exists there, because with a title like that, the rants almost concoct themselves.
Right. Since publishing my essay Unidentify, Climbing Down the Other Peak of Liberalism, I've connected with dots, dozens of other leftists around the world burned out by the hypocrisy and stagnancy of liberal identity politics. Many of us share common experiences of trauma and oppression, some of which fit liberal identity narratives and others of which don't. Each of us has come to this place of knowing that we cannot live our lives any longer in a state of perpetual outrage, evasion, false confidence, and reactionary, shame-driven mob politics.
You think liberalism is the ideology that has reactionary shame politics woven into it? You think liberalism is more guilty of that than leftism? My brother in, I can't even think of something to be your brother in, but sir, if you think social justice is the solution to liberalism, you are literally talking from the other side of Alice's looking glass, my friend. That is how backwards and upside fucking down you have to be to think that moving from liberalism to progressivism is a movement away from oppressive identity politics bullshit. Moving on.
Alright. Title that essay described a sort of mountain, which is what I see when I picture social justice in my mind. At the top, we're promised the egalitarian utopian paradise, but the way there is constantly obstructed by one thing or another, sooner or later, and this is where so much connectivity is happening now. We realize that no one has actually seen the mountaintop yet. We're just believing in stories that other people have told us or that we've overheard them reassuring themselves with. Upon further examination, we realize that this truth, that no one has seen the mountaintop, explains all the conflicting stories we've been hearing all along.
Sweetheart, egalitarianism is not going to. You're never going to get to egalitarianism from social justice because social justice explicitly is anti-egalitarian, is anti-universal standards, and instead in favor of micromanaging everyone's identity and victimhood with an ever-increasing like fucking fractal of false dichotomies, false neo-Hegelian thesis antithesis dichotomies, specifically. Moving along.
Okay, climbing down is a choice I believe more and more of us are making. It's a humbling process of admitting that we've spent a good chunk of our lives fumbling through a quasi mythic landscape we still have trouble mapping. And along the way down, as we verbalize our political and personal changes, we start overcoming. Sorry. Um, we start overcoming this person we used to be and begin to see more clearly how deeply affected our sense of self and power had become while on the mountain. This piece is about the vampires many of us became in our quest for the mountaintop, but it's also about another world beyond that landscape where our utopian visions might actually still be grown. Okay, so vampire as metaphor.
Metaphor,
It all
assuming. Yeah.
not to be a stick in the mud, but could you please, before you send an article like this, could you make sure to read it, see if it's actually truly topical? Like just
I
skim
mean,
it.
it's still fucking appropriating vampire imagery for the sake of political bullshit. So I think it works.
Okay,
Anyway,
fair. I
um,
don't know. I
to
just
to be clear though, vampires at least absorb other people's essence in either the form of blood or in the form of life energy for their own benefit. Social justice does nothing but hinder those people who it infects while simultaneously leeching off of everyone else. So the vampire metaphor is somewhat inapt here because a vampire in the like classical formulation drains life either in the form of blood or in the form of energy from a host or a victim for the survival of the creature's own benefit. And no matter how deep into social justice you go, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is no pot of gold at the end of this particular fucking monochrome or monochromatic rainbow because social justice is fundamentally built on Hegel's thesis antithesis dichotomy, which itself was built on nothing but ahistorical conjecture and false dichotomies that should be defenestrated from the nearest window because that's what you're supposed to do in classical philosophy when you're faced with a false dichotomy. The thing that will never cease to amaze me is how long Hegelian thesis antithesis dichotomy and its various like reflavorings in the neo-Hegelian zeitgeist have survived despite the fact that it's built on an ahistorical lie that itself is built on a false dichotomy which you're supposed to get rid of in philosophy. God damn it. Anyway, moving on.
uh, climbing down is a choice I believe more and more of us are making. It's humbling. It's a humbling process of admitting that we spent a good chunk of our lives fumbling through a quasi. Oh, I read that.
You already read that part.
Okay. And along the way down, as we verbalize our political and personal changes, we start uncovering this person we used to be. Uh, oh, wait, did I read that?
Yes.
Okay. This piece about the vampires many of us became in our quest for the mountaintop, but it's also about another world beyond that landscape where our utopian visions might actually still be grown.
Nope. The utopian visions are the problem. You need to get rid of them because all you're making in their places is dystopias. Like most like most people who create dystopias, you try your very damnedest to create a utopia and you fail so fucking hard that you create the very hells you're trying to escape from and even worse than the hells you're trying to escape from most likely.
Oh, okay. Drencher asked question on Helsing Alucard for like one of your.
No.
No.
Not even remotely. I haven't watched much of Hellsing. Most of what I know from Hellsing comes from Hellsing Ultimate Abridged, but he doesn't. Granted, I haven't seen much like art from him outside of Hellsing Ultimate Abridged, but he doesn't look hot at all. I suppose I could have said Dio, but Dio is an evil cunt, so that's why Dio wasn't on the list. I could have said Dio from the first arc of JoJo's, but even I have standards with regards to that shit, and thus no Dio. Moving along though.
The bat pick even looks like it's green. Yeah. Okay. How social media, identity politics, and trauma created social acceptance of vampirism. The kind of liberal identity politics I describe in Unidentity and join countless other marginalized peoples in critiquing have in fact been critiqued by leftists for generations. This particular social conflict between leftist unity and liberal divisiveness is nothing new. Nevertheless,
Again, you have it completely backwards. Liberals, as in the like John Locke, the like John Locke, J.S. Mill harm principle style classical liberals, are the universalistic unifying ones, and the social justice progressive left is the break everything down into ever increasingly more minute forms of false dichotomies of oppressor and oppressed, which when you get right down to the bottom of it is just Hegel's historical dialectic of thesis and antithesis rebranded 1,001 times. Moving on.
alright. Nevertheless, I believe that in the 2000s, with the advent and centralization of social media platforms, we entered a new period in this dialogue. This period has so far enabled unhealthy relationships between people played out in politicized terms and reva-
Bless you.
revamped social justice movements. Okay.
Social justice is the enemy. It, insofar as social justice vampires, per this metaphor, exist, like social justice is the vampirism, or more aptly, neo-Hegelianism or Hegelianism is the like origin of the virus, and the virus just keeps mutating into 1,000 different subgroups. If you really want to be free of the vampirism of social justice, then you need to refute Hegel. Like, you can't just keep breaking branches off this diseased tree and act like you're fixing the problem. If you want to fix this problem, it must be taken out by the root, which is half Hegel's fault and the other half is Rousseau's fault. The ideological bastard children of Hegel and Rousseau is basically responsible for every evil thing the 20th and 21st centuries did to one another. Moving along.
All right. Both internet forums and socio-political movements have always had their toxic personalities. Social media cannot be blamed for producing them. However, it is my belief that popular social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have inadvertently encouraged toxicity, although I do not believe this was their intention.
Which, at the time you were writing this, every social media platform on the earth was pandering like a motherfucker to social justice, otherwise known as wokeness, otherwise known as patriarchy theory, or 1,000 other different variations on the same phrasing. If social media can be said to be a problem, or can be said to amplify people's toxicity, the reason why those toxicities exist is at least partially due and partially the fault of what at the time was being referred to as social justice. Frankly, I would prefer if we go back to calling it that because social justice is a far more descriptive term for the problem than wokeness is. But that's neither here nor there. If you are complaining about the way social media was being managed in 2018, my brother in befuddling philosophy, you need to look in the mirror. You need to look deep into the mirror as though you are Lilith de Temskire, my friend. Fuck you entirely. Moving along.
Okay. Uh, Instead, I think the promises of social media, the promises of connecting people across the world, providing a platform to raise awareness of injustice and amplifying a voice of the oppressed, were intended as an answer to the relative isolation, limits, and ineptitude of earlier internet forums and social movements, hoping to accomplish the same.
Okay, fuck everything else about that sentence. This is your fundamental problem. You're presupposing injustice and presupposing oppression or oppressed groups or oppressed marginalized people and so forth. Those presuppositions themselves are the problem, and they are very often self fulfilling prophecies because in your effort to create the social justice utopia, you wind up victimizing and oppressing anyone who your ideology presupposes to be an oppressor. And what you end up doing there is then in because in or rather under the auspices, that was the phrase I was looking for, under the auspices that these groups are already oppressors in theory and in your hypothetical view of history and the world, you have presupposed that these people are oppressors and thus given yourself moralistic carte blanche to go ahead and oppress them. I wouldn't quite frame it in those terms because, again, I find the oppressor and oppressed dichotomy no more useful than the Hegelian thesis antithesis dichotomy, but in your own terms, what you've done there is you presupposed someone to be an oppressor and then used that presupposition of them being an oppressor as an excuse to oppress them in the hopes of leveling the playing field, which might be useful if your assessment of the playing field were accurate, but tis not, and tis never have been, and is founded on neo-Hegelian bullshit and a false dichotomy fundamentally, and thus, in order to create your social justice utopia, you wind up having to declare everyone who's ever been successful in human history to be an Untermensch that you can then jackboot stamp on for the remainder of fucking time. Moving on.
Okay. I first joined the Facebook in 2005 as a way to keep in touch with high school friends as we graduated and moved away from home. Beyond known friends, Facebook groups offered a means of connecting with broader social groups like GLBT people, pagans, deaf people, etc., from around the country and eventually the world. This masterfully resolved the scarcity of brick and mortar community spaces or dispersion of demographic groups by permitting even the most isolated people the possibility of connecting with others like them through simply creating an account and joining a group.
Okay, speaking of someone who is both, in your terminology, an LGBT person and in your terminology, a pagan, neither of those terms are terms that I would use for myself, but I would fit under your definition of those things. You can fuck right off. Given that this article is from 2018, I'm gonna dust off a equally as dank and old-fashioned meme to respond to it, which is of course not your fucking shield, you entitled aristocratic academic hack. I refuse to be a fucking bullet in your fucking moral purity gun. You cannot speak for a pagan and you cannot speak for LGBT people because I find your ability to empathize with both of those people lacking, and thus you can fuck right off. I refuse to be a card in your game of moral strip poker, you absolute harridan. Moving on.
I think Facebook recognized its role in this niche too. In 2006, the social media platform was one of the few places where gay marriage was permitted. We could indicate on our profiles what genders we were interested in, and even list our same-sex partners as spouses. Add-on apps allowed us to expand on this information with an earlier 2000s era version of the dozens of genders now recognized by many social media outlets. Additional developments such as the like button, the news feed, and the ability for individual users to share or upvote links to articles, videos, and blogs to and from all their connections through it create a platform with extraordinary potential for facilitating social awareness and change.
All of that potential was squandered by the vicissitudes of the social justice mob. All of those communities could have learned to coexist on their own fucking terms, and very often did, without any intervention from academic theory or post hoc rationalization a la Hegel. So all your all your fucking ideology did was take something in the, late 2000s and early 2010s that was functioning on a level that would have beggared description at any other point in human history, and enforced a kind of moral order on that self-organizing system that basically just inflamed tensions between everyone and everyone else and ruined the momentary good times that were the late 2000s and early 2010s of the internet. That system was organizing itself completely without any intervention from you or your academic and moral and philosophical cronies, and you and yours, in order to make it more utopian, killed it. You killed it dead, you burned it down like so many cities in the George Floyd riots. And now you're trying to claim credit for the thing that you and your interventions destroyed. You can fuck right off, my darling. Moving on.
All right. With this potential, however, are several drawbacks. Concern over fake news has only recently become an issue people expect social media to resolve, and concern over how the instant feedback of likes and other reactions affect our communication styles and content choices is yet to reach the same level of alarm in social media ethics, perhaps most relevant to political discourse aided by social media though should be recognition that microblogging platforms like Facebook and Twitter indirectly discourage nuance either through character limits or to post or the instant feedback culture, which seems to reward reactive, short, in, invective post over long form, more emotionally moderated content.
Invective just means like inflammatory or scandalous or insulting. That's what
Okay.
invective means. Um, but again, like no one expected the internet to regulate mis and disinformation. Prior to the like mid 2010s, it was just assumed that that which was the most convincing was convincing, and anything that was fake or weird or twisted or false would eventually sink to the metaphorical bottom of the drink like sediment. Like prior to the age of social justice, the age of like enforced social justice by every corporation and form of academia and form of media, prior to the age of social justice, it was understood and expected that people who were online had to be discerning about what they believed and what they didn't. No one needed academia to come down from its lofty tower and declare what is and is not false. And by the way, just hi, person from 2025 sitting here, um, we still don't need the internet to arbitrate which information is true and which is false. We are perfectly capable of and should be expected to making these decisions for ourselves. And if the mainstream media finds it infuriating that things that happen organically on the internet are more convincing than that shit, which is usually what they mean when they say disinformation. They don't mean information that's false. They don't mean information that is flimsy. They don't mean information that is conspiratorial. They mean information that looks or is more compelling than whatever bullshit the mainstream media and mainstream academia are trying to enforce that people think. And by the way, my solution to the disinformation problem has always been the same. If you have an issue with people finding other people's arguments or other people's information more convincing than you, academia, how about taking the pole out of your ass, the fucking holier than thou pedestal you have shoved up there? Take that take that pedestal out of your ass and become more convincing. Rather than criminalize other people for being more convincing than you, try to reach people where they live. Try explaining your reasoning instead of declaring it like you're an authority on anything. That's the biggest problem of the mainstream media. Rather than trying to understand how people think and thereby convince them to believe what they think is true, they just authoritarianly ban or banish anything that they don't feel like explaining to the nether realm while enforcing you cannot disbelieve the thing I am telling you. And that will never be more compelling than letting people make these decisions for them fucking selves. If you worry about certain information being more convincing than you, maybe ask yourself the question you should have been asking for more than a decade now, which is what is it about that information that is more convincing to the audience that we want to pay attention to us, and how can we make ourselves more convincing than the alternative? But instead, no, academia just goes, we shouldn't have to be more convincing. You just shouldn't be allowed to be convinced by anything but us. And fuck yourselves, frankly. Fuck that entire logic in every hole. Moving on.
Right. Okay. More than rewarding sometimes toxic behavior with a sea of likes and shares, microblogging platforms encourage a specific type of political analysis. This analysis avoids logical, constructive, contextual, or critical thinking in favor of emotional, destructive, selective, and reductive narratives which complement or reproduce classically politicized identity narratives.
You are describing social justice. That is precisely the problem with social justice as it stood in 2018. The people in question that I'm thinking of are people like Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, Zoe Quinn, um, Christy Winters, Christiosity, H. H. Bomber Guy, all those folks. The people, what you just described is literally social justice's MO. It's please help me, I'm a victim. Emotional argument, emotional argument, emotional argument, moral argument, moral argument, moral argument, instead of again, it's like what I was describing with the mainstream media just now. Instead of Anita coming out and going, "This is why Sargon or Thunderfoot or the Amazing Atheist at the time or um, Mundane Matt or any of those," instead of coming out and doing a video responding to her critics like Sargon, like Thunderfoot, like the Amazing Atheist at the time, and so on and so forth. Instead of that, what Anita did, instead of making an argument and demonstrating that her detractors were wrong, as and when they were wrong, instead of doing that, what she did instead was go to the corporations that oversaw social media and go, help, help, I'm a victim. I'm being attacked and harassed by insert evil buzzword, insert evil buzzword, and I shouldn't have to defend myself in a rational manner. I should just have the moral high ground because woman card, or because other social justice talking points. To which the answer is, was, and always should have been, fuck you, no, get good, cunts, and make a better argument, or at least answer your critics. But much like the mainstream media, Anita's response to this was, I'm morally better than those people and their arguments, therefore I shouldn't have to be convincing or make arguments on my own account. I should just be the only voice people are allowed to listen to. It's the same move every fucking time. And it pisses me off.
Moving on.
Yep.
Hey, this is a pretty long article. Holy shit. I don't think we're gonna finish this.
Let's try to get at least halfway, and we can tack it on to the last week of the month, along with anything else that we either can't get
Dude,
to or
we're barely even a quarter of it done.
Okay, so I will try to interrupt less then, and we will strive to get halfway before we call it for tonight.
For example, consider reactions to the recent wave of sexual assault survivors publicly describing their ordeals and, in some cases, also identifying people in power who perpetrated them. Almost immediately, this phenomenon was absorbed into the classic feminist identity narrative of powerful men abusing powerless women. Experiences outside of this narrative, particularly those involving trans victims, were critiqued for erasing the experiences of women. Likewise, women sharing stories about being hard R by trans people were critiqued for transphobia, and many men who shared stories of sexual assault by women were also shut down for the sexism of taking this moment away from women collectively and for distracting from the evidently more important issue of men assaulting women. After the first weeks of this, an additional layer of public shaming was added, and that was the apparent transgression of not naming the specific creator of the hashtag #MeToo when describing one's sexual assault.
This this is perhaps one of the most disturbingly stupid things I've ever heard, because if you go back through that paragraph, you will notice what I am noticing, and it gets remarkably disturbing. Instead of remembering that by and large the human race is split into two halves, that of women and that of men, generally speaking. I'm not disputing the possibility of other alternatives, but as a general rule, the dichotomy is man and woman generally. Um, and instead of focusing on the opposite of women, you just focused on cis women and trans women. Do you think you might have left someone out there? Someone like, oh, I don't know, let me think. Men. You left out the possibility of men being victimized by women entirely.
Uh,
Even even back in the early days of Me Too, I did see at least some attempt to think of men being victimized by other men in the form of prison rape, but that, of course, it completely ignores the issue of women can and do assault, victimize, and do all sorts of unmentionable sexual shit to men, and you didn't mention men being victims of women once.
what?
That is the most your
Don't.
brain on social justice thing I have ever heard in my life.
Uh, what? They made mention of it. Don't.
No, they didn't. They made mention of women being victimized by men, and they made mention of trans women potentially being victimized by men, but they didn't mention men being victimized by women once.
Uh, yeah, many men who shared stories of sexual assault by women were also shut down for the sexism of taking this moment away from women collectively and for distracting from the evidently more important issue of men assaulting women. They're bringing up the problem of
Okay, then I retract the previous rant. I must have misheard you. Anyway, moving on.
what did you think I said?
I thought you said that trans women were getting complained about for taking the spotlight away from women as a whole.
Well, no, they made mention of that too.
Okay, so I I apologize. I apparently wasn't listening closely enough. Anyhow, moving on.
Uh, I've identified three major takeaways. I've, I've identified three major takeaways from observing these reactions. First, they were a reminder that liberal identity politics care more about preserving a specific narrative, i.e., men over women, white over black, straight over queer, etc., than with actually acknowledging and ending the violent or oppressive acts themselves. Second, the microblogging structure of the social media platforms this movement took place on enabled a viral spreading of shame and guilt directed at survivors for the sake of preserving these narratives, and an irrational set of social hierarchies or expected checkboxes, naming the creator of a hashtag, not acknowledging that minorities can be rapists, etc. Lastly, the trauma of human existence is widespread and so far failed by the narrow-mindedness of identity-dominant thinking.
None of that is liberalism's problem, or even liberalism's purview. That is a problem unique to social justice, or what is now called wokeness. It is a, or rather, I guess I should say, it is a problem unique to any system that operates on some version or other of Hegel's thesis antithesis dichotomy. I apologize. I'm being distracted by the dog fucking yelling at his own reflection in the glass of the door again. And I I despise having to deal with that dog. He's not even my dog, and I hate it. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that is a problem unique to the ideological bastard children of Hegel and Rousseau. That's not liberalism's fault. That's progressivism. If you want to be more normy about describing it, or social justice, if you want to be slightly more precise. And like I said, if you want to get into the really pedantic philosophical weeds, they're the bastard children of Hegel and Rousseau. Moving on.
Uh, the leftists I've worked with have often related their burnout in decades past from considerations of feminism and social justice movements. Their stories communicate a similarly observed irrational preoccupation with identity-based politics to the determinant of resolution on the issues they aim to address. Where I believe my generation differs is that we are additionally dealing with a degree of instantaneous global connectivity previously unknown. Social media is not simply informing us about issues halfway around the world. It is enabling a cultural expectation that we will immediately and continuously offer the correct opinion and precise amount of properly constructed outrage regarding each and every one of them. Risk public shaming, guilt, pressure, and accusations of all manner of isms and phobias. And while these politics may conceptualize themselves as radical, revolutionary, or far to the left, the reference points they consistently cite rarely predate postmodern liberal identity discourse.
Again, you are claiming this is a problem with liberalism when it is in fact a problem unique to the ideologies connecting themselves to social justice. You are somehow trying to blame liberalism for the shit that social justice and social justice uniquely created, and that is not the case. You can blame Hegel if you want to really get at the heart of the problem. You can blame a combination of Hegel and Rousseau if you want to be slightly more nuanced, but you certainly cannot blame classical, like English, John Locke and John Stuart Mill liberalism for something that was created thanks to the inbreeding of French liberals in the form of those who inherited Rousseau and German quote unquote liberals inheriting Hegel. Moving along. I will mute again so that the dog's barking does not annoy you guys as much as it's annoying me.
Alright, take for instance the romanticized image of the Stonewall Uprising regularly conjured up in contemporary political debates internal to LGBT plus folks. Many of today's activists are utterly convinced of the fact that either trans women of color uniquely lead the riots or that their alleged presence at a New York bar in the 1960s is somehow relevant or obvious justification for trans inclusion in political movements today. References to the social advances enjoyed by Soviet trans people or the relative period and regions of social acceptance enjoyed by pre-modern or ancient cross-dressing and binary defining people are even rarer than references to protests or uprisings only slightly earlier than Stonewall, such as Compton's or Dewey's. This selective history is indicative of the political context. The narrative complements the departure of mid-century liberal discourse from earlier leftist movements is the start of liberal identity histories.
Again, that's not liberal. Nothing you described there is liberal. It is quote unquote progressive or quote unquote social justice, and most aptly laid at the feet of a combination of Hegel, Rousseau, and the Frankfurt School, all of which are far more accurately describable as postmodern leftism than liberalism. Liberalism has nothing to do with the things you just labeled as postmodern liberal. And by the way, liberalism doesn't even have a postmodern version of itself because postmodernism is a derivation of Hegel's ahistorical but allegedly historical thesis antithesis dichotomy, which the Frankfurt School inherited and ran with. So, again, you are blaming liberalism for social justice instead of blaming social justice for social justice. And it's pissing me off. Moving along.
Okay, probably after this one, we'll call it for this.
Yep, and move to the next one.
Okay. My criticism of these politics is not coming from a place of purity or superiority. Rather, I have been the exact type of person I am criticizing. Before I left Facebook, my newsfeed was routinely swallowed by similar demands for trans people to account for rapists who happen to be transgender, for Jews of the diaspora to account for the actions of the State of Israel, for Muslims to account for the actions of ISIL, or for Wiccans to account for incidents of homophobia or transphobia in individual covens, for liberals and leftists to account for how the federal government spends our taxes, etc. Like many people of my age, I engage in these tactics and likely help teach their art to those performing them today.
Okay, this guy is obviously in an even more rarefied form of academia than even I'm familiar with, because I didn't know there was a controversy about Wicca not being trans inclusive in their covens. But the odd duck out here is a large swath of what we could call the Muslim world actually is in favor of the extremism of groups like ISIS or ISIL. So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to call false equivalency, because Jews don't have a political hive mind that they aspire to, nor do Wiccans, nor do men, nor do women. But by and large, most Muslim politics, insofar as there can be Muslim politics, is tied to Sharia. The only question is how fundamentalist are they in their interpretations of said Sharia, and how violent are they willing to let their jihads or struggles be. And so yeah, I'm gonna have to call false dichotomy. Muslims, rather uniquely as a religion, do at least have to make some effort to decry their extremists, because unlike in most of the other groups you mentioned, those extremists are often lionized and framed as heroic freedom fighters. It's kind of like how, as much as I find the right wing going back to TradCon mode annoying in today's day and age, I'm not going to sit here and act like there's an equivalency between the people being mad about Charlie Kirk's assassination, for example, and Antifa. So one of these sides is significantly more guilty of the crime than the other, and not acknowledging that would be a false equivalency. Moving to the next thing.
D'Angelo asked, so is this guy breaking with intersectionality?
It didn't appear so in the portion that we read tonight. It seems like he's trying to blame liberalism for the excesses of social justice, and simultaneously purify the good name of social justice in doing so. Basically, whenever it's basically the rad lib argument, I think, is what he's doing. He's arguing that anytime social justice fucks up, it's not real social justice. It's just rad lib shit, I think, is the route they're going with that. They're wrong, of course, because several of the things he mentioned are explicitly and uniquely associated with post-Frankfurt School ideologies or post-Hegelian ideologies, or specifically social justice. So, yeah, he's wrong in that he thinks every time social justice has a negative consequence, it's social justice being dealt with wrong, and therefore should be liberalism's fault. But I think that's the route he's going, is whenever social justice fucks up, it's not social justice fucking up, it's liberalism co-opting social justice or some shit. Moving on.
Alright. The transformative nature of vampirism, 2 centuries of Gothic characterization. This was published January 10th, 2020.
And again, I'm guessing we didn't cover it at the time because I wasn't looking for specifically vampire stuff at the time, considering this is the first week we've done or this is the first year we've really done theme weeks.
I figured we'd mix it up a bit, to be fair. Anyway, The Legacy of the Vampire is a revealing case study tracing the ways in which tropes and genres are influenced by societal changes and cultural trends throughout history. I mean, that goes with any like creature of folklore or monster, really.
Well, and it just as often happens the other way around as it does that way. Like, very often it's the literature of things. It's the literature of a culture or of a time that result in them viewing something a certain way rather than the other way around. What they want this to be is a unilateral social construct thing, but in most cases it's a symbiotic give and take. Cultures influence their mythology, but their mythology also influences the culture just as much, if not more.
Okay.
Moving on.
Am's Victorian Popular Culture resource provides an insight into how the characterization of vampires has evolved over the last 2 centuries. That was the last part of that title. First performed in August 1820 and set in Scotland, The Vampire or The Bride of the Isles is a piece of theatre tellingly billed as a romantic drama in 2 acts. Adapted from John Polidori's The Vampire, this play helped transform the repulsive vampire of European folklore into the aristocratic, devilishly charming character we see in popular vampire fiction today.
To be fair, and this is where my folkloric pedantry is going to come in here, the concept of the demon lover is a lot older than this example. This just happens to be when the demon lover concept sort of melded with the vampire. Whereas in prior cultures, the demon lover in question was either an incubus or succubus, i.e., a demon, or a fae, specifically in the British Isles. The quintessential example of which probably being the Lianshi from British and Irish folklore. But even then, this is not the first time hot vampires or romantic vampires were a thing, or even them being associated with the demon lover. It's
Okay.
just the first modern case of it. But
Okay.
if you look into medieval folklore, the vampire as demon lover is quite a lot older than this person is aware of.
Could
Yeah.
the argument be made that this is what popularized it? Not that it's the first, but truly popularized the idea of the vampire.
Probably not. If we're being honest, I think this person is being selective about when they wanted to start this analysis from. I'm curious as to why. What argument about the recent 200 years is this person trying to make that would be more difficult to make if they were more honest about when the demon lover trope and the vampire trope crossed over? Or is this just them being too ignorant or too shallow in their research to have looked further than the most recent 200 years?
A script play digitized from the Malcolm Morley collection at the University of London allows contemporary readers to visualize the 19th century imagining of the vampire, especially through the details and costume direction. Perhaps surprisingly, this staging suggests that Lord Ruthven, the titular villain, wear a plaid kilt, sandals, and a Scotch hat and feathers. Far cry from the modern vampire who we may picture in a dress suit and cape. This design is eye-catching, overstated. However, the costume stresses the threat of the traditional vampire, its capability of integrating into high society to seek out victims without being noticed. Okay.
It's probably because the play in question was set in Scotland and therefore he dressed like a normal Scottish aristocrat would.
Following the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897. Oh wow, it's actually I mean, I assumed the 19th century, but I assumed like 70s, maybe 80s.
No, a lot of what we think of as 19th century literature happened in the latter part of the Victorian period, so like 1890s.
Well, no, I know. Well, Frankenstein came out in like the 30s, 1830s.
Yeah, there's quite a large time discrepancy between Frankenstein and Dracula.
So I'm just like, it's just surprising. It to me is all.
Because they're always kind of grouped together in the modern sort of zeitgeist.
No, I just assumed they were at similar time, like they were released at similar times because they. were very similar in terms of stories. Not well, tones and settings, I guess. That's
I
how I look.
mean,
That's how I looked at it, at least.
it's kind of an open question as to whether Frankenstein was an influence on Bram Stoker or not. I tend to lean in the direction of or not when it comes to that, just because there's not actually much in common with regards to the story or influences of the story. Um,
Well, they're both very gothic literature. So I okay again. I just think
that's that's
not
a bit like that's a bit like saying that's a bit like saying the modern superhero movie has crossover with the noir detective genre. That's technically
so. Hey,
true,
don't. Can I
but
finish my
still,
thought first?
sorry.
You're fine. I would like to get my point across first before you interject. Is all. What I meant was to expound on it by gothic literature. Again, I'm not saying that they were. Again, I agree that I don't think Dracula was inspired by Frankenstein. But what I mean is, in terms of overall tone, they were very similar, and I had again, this is just my own. This is just me because I was not aware of that. That I assumed that books of that nature came out at a very similar time frame, like at very most 10 years apart.
And what I was trying to get at before was I think that's because to our modern sort of literary palette, there's very little difference in tone between something that would have been made in the 1830s and the 1890s. But someone who was alive at the time could definitely tell the difference. Again, the parallel I was making was comparing Frankenstein to Dracula, literally speaking, is a little bit like someone a century or two from now seeing parallels between the noir detective genre of the 1930s and the um and the superhero movie genre of the 2010s and
I
2020s.
guess. Sorry, I guess my also thing is like, given how influential Bram Stoker's Dracula was, I guess
Mhm.
I just assumed for it to be released a lot earlier and just have been around a lot longer, relatively speaking.
Well, the same could be said for the likes of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes was also the 1890s. Um,
Right. Again, it's just like it's that okay. So that's basically what I'm saying though. Is like it feels like it should have been a little longer, right?
I think one of the reasons why a lot of the like late Victorian stuff stuck around as much as it did is because they were kind of in a transitionary phase between what we could call like 19th century literature and what we could call modern literature, and also because the um the cinematograph was being slowly transformed into the actual video camera, and the craft of movie making happened around the same time as the Victorian literature. As a result, some of the earliest things that were adapted for the movie screen were Victorian literature, because from the perspective of someone growing up in like 1910 or 1920, that was just a couple decades ago. So in some sense, the like late Victorian era was almost modern when those movies were being made. It's
Okay, I'm
it's
just
really it's a really interesting head fuck when you get right down to it of, oh wait, shit, the first movies were in the 1920s and the like last Victorian novels were in the like late 1890s. So for someone who was adapting them, it was a modern newfangled thing, probably still a little bit.
fair enough. I'm just
Yeah.
The early 20th century saw another regeneration in the popular image of the vampire. This time, the transformation can be partially attributed to one individual, silent film actress Theda Bara, who popularized the notion of the vampire as a femme fatale, hypnotic, and enigmatic. She presented the vampire as an alluring force in films such as A Fool There Was, 1915, interviewed in picture plays in 1919, periodically digitized, periodical, sorry, periodical digitized from the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum. Barra described her favorite hobby as overhearing definitions of a vampire and names her favorite flower lilies, the vampire of the flower world. Here we see Barra incorporating the fictional character traits into her public image as an actress, an indication of the sheer popularity of this particular version of the vampire.
I mean, the Bram Stoker's Dracula had Dracula's wives, and they were very much in the like femme fatale seductress mode, or mold, I guess I should say. Moving along, though.
The character is the vampire is a character that transforms its victims at best, draining the subject of their youth and energy, at worst, inflicting the fate of the undead. As we have seen, however, the vampire is equally subjected to transformation, be it in literature, on stage, or on film, shifting from Scottish noble to femme fatale. The vampire in these sources reflect both the fears and desires of historic consumers of popular culture.
I mean, maybe, but I'm not sure the relationship is causal. Is that the end of the article?
Yep.
That was ridiculously short.
You gotta read these, man, before you send them.
I try not to so that I can have an organic reaction to them when we cover them on stream.
At least, like, skim it to see if it's long enough that it's worth covering, man. Like, you don't have to read it specifically, just make sure you look at the bar on the side and see if it's long enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind if it's too long, because obviously we can cover it later, but
Mm-hmm.
the shortness, man, come on.
Yeah. Anyway, next.
Yeah, it's loading. Give me a sec. What the fuck?
Hmm.
It's taking longer to load than I thought it would.
Ah.
Hold on. Okay. Okay. There we go. Are vampires the ultimate metaphor for social ostracism? Written by Courtney Perkins, published July 30th, 2025.
My initial reaction to the premise is fuck no, vampires are vampires. They are not supposed to be a metaphor for anything. They're supposed to be a portrayal of vampires.
So, I don't disagree with you, but we had a discussion briefly about this on Thursday when we talked about this article.
Mhm.
I don't. To be fair, when you're writing and this is specifically for stories overall,
Mhm.
specifically like horror or gothic or whatever that involves like a creature or monster, so to speak.
Mhm.
Depending on what story you're writing, the monster or antagonist or whatever ultimately yeah, it is just storytelling in general. Uh, does become metaphorical of something depending on what your story is about or what you're writing. Um,
Yeah.
Oftentimes, it should be coincidental, and you just write the story as it's developing. But sometimes, yeah, there can be little inferences there or little like baselines to work off of. So while I don't
I
think,
Go ahead. Sorry.
while the premise of this article I do disagree with because that implies that that's the only quote unquote metaphor that vampires are. That's not the case. I
I would
think
also. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say like depending on how you use a vampire in a story specifically, it's a metaphor for whatever the story is trying to convey.
I would also say that in general, unless you explicitly go out of your way to make a vampire about ostracism in some figurative sense, ostracism is a really bad thing to associate vampires with because vampires' whole shtick, at least in the modern zeitgeist, is being so otherworldly charming and seductive that people let their guards down around. And I mean, one of the like quintessential vampire powers is vampiric hypnosis. I think if you want a monster to be a metaphor for ostracism, Adam from Frankenstein is a far better um is
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
a far better answer to that if you're looking in those sorts of figurative senses because that's basically the entire story of Adam. He's ostracized not just by society in general, but by his own father because his father is a dick. Um, and his monstrousness comes explicitly from having love to share with the world that doesn't ever find an outlet. The quote is literally, um, "I have love in I have love in me the likes of which you cannot imagine, and rage the likes of which you could not believe. If I cannot satiate the one, I shall indulge the other." It's about as black and white statement as it can be. I.e., he wants to be good and be loved and cared for by people, but if people are quite insistent, including his own father, on not providing that outlet, then fuck it, rage it is. Moving on though.
are vampires the ultimate metaphor for social ostracism? Vampires are back, recession indicator. And while every writer must create their own set of rules for how they work, they have long been a metaphor for social ostracism. They're shunned from forming communities, forced to stick to themselves, and often let to wander the earth alone. In the most negative light, they're viewed as parasites to society, deviants who can't be trusted. In positive interpretations, we relate them as emblems of persecution and loneliness. This
I
makes the perfect representation of the ways in which humans can ostracize each other. I just want to finish.
I don't think either of those suppositions is accurate. Again, one of the quintessential things about vampires is they're charming and refined to an almost like archetypical hypnotic degree. I mean, literal vampire hypnosis is a quintessential power of theirs. Um, I think you have to cherry pick like a motherfucker to not come across a vampire interpretation that has the powers of superhuman charm and refinement and or vampire hypnosis. Again, if you're looking for ostracism in like the Universal Monster set, Adam Frankenstein counts. Even someone like the Creature of the Black Lagoon could probably work better. I think that's why it worked so well in Shape of Water because there was already that the monster as other motif. If you're looking for that sort of motif, I think you'd be hard. especially in a world, post the Twilight vampire boom, where everyone had a romantic vampire fucking spinoff, and even before then, you had Interview with a Vampire and Bram Stoker's Dracula very much emphasized their charming, hypnotic qualities. So like, but yeah, especially in a post Twilight vampire landscape, I don't think you can meaningfully say that vampires are not just not often ostracism metaphors. I don't think you could convincingly portray in a post Twilight landscape vampires as ostracized and still be convincingly a vampire. I think if you did try to create a version of vampires that were all about ostracism, you a lot of people would have a hard time believing that that was a vampire that you were portraying, or at least it would be a very rare, very outlier version of vampires in that particular story if you tried to explicitly do that. Moving on.
Queerness. Vampires have long been a metaphor for queerness. I mean, okay, Don, can I play devil's advocate for a quick second?
Yes, by all means, go ahead.
Let's be fully honest. In recent,
Vampires are posh fuckers, and the queer eye for the straight guy trope and the like theater gay trope and so on. There's a lot of crossover there. You could in fact do a vamp eye for the or yeah
so
uh
can I,
vamp eye for the living guy, and it probably would work. It probably would work in like a satirical universe.
Don?
Sorry.
Yeah, good. Yeah, kind of playing devil's advocate there. Um, kind of piggybacking off what Don said. Uh, there, in let's say in the last 30 or so years, when vampires have been featured in media, there's always this eroticness to their vampiric nature,
Hmm.
which is just a given, really. I mean, even before then, sure.
And again, the trope of the the gay guy who is very interested in theater and like the finer things in life, be it from like a Fraser Crane type gay versus a like I'm trying to think of another I'm trying to think of another really good example of like the stereotypical gay behavior to the point that straight characters like Fraser are often mistaken for being gay because they do have those refined tendencies. I think even in Hannibal the movie, not Hannibal the show, um, the one of the FBI people that is trying to find Hannibal after he escaped um, says that he thinks Hannibal is queer because he's interested in all those refined things. So there's definitely some crossover between stereotypical queer imagery having a love for the finer things and for the fancy things and for semi-effeminate things, and the vampire also being like uh, highly refined, highly quasi-aristocratic love of the finer things, and especially when they're juxtaposed with werewolves, who are like the bestial masculine type. Yeah, where vampires do tend to read feminine in the same way that aristocrats always sort of read as feminine.
So, can I actually like?
Sorry.
What I was gonna say was with the eroticness of vampires. Uh, Actually, more recently, there's been a more how to say. Ah, fuck, I don't say. Don, can I get a pass from you?
Here. Use it wisely. Don't make me regret giving it to you, please.
And just for the record, so this is on the record. What pass am I being given right now?
You are being given the quote unquote queer pass. Use it wisely.
Okay. Let's say in the last decade or so, there's been an uptick in more homoerotic, vampiric uh, fiction.
Mm-hmm. As a subset, especially of the romantic vampire surge brought about by Twilight.
Yes. Um, to be fair, this has gotten more traction with Interview with the Vampire, specifically the series that's come out on AMC. But obviously, the book series had that kind of queerness to it. I assume I have not read it myself, but
Oh
I've
no,
heard.
you can definitely read quote unquote queer subtext into Anne Rice's works if you're so inclined. I of course am not that way inclined and generally avoid thinking in thematic terms whenever I can. But if you're the sort of person who's looking for themes, and you're the sort of person who specifically is looking for identitarian themes, vampires are at least arguably queer adjacent, more so than I would. That's why, unlike most of the cases where I would rail against vampires aren't queer, you moron, they're just courtly and aristocratic, which is certainly, I think I could say, given that there is a sort of symmetry between gay stereotypes and vampire stereotypes. And I think the thing Brainstormer was sort of alluding to and not wanting to be blunt about because he was trying not to abuse the path I just handed him is um, vampire sexuality in particular is very often symbolic of deviant sexuality, and gay people also deviant sexuality. So the parallel between vampire and gay is not out of left field. And again, even just earlier tonight, my reasoning for why it's hard to find vampire himbos, at least in part, was vampires are too similar to me in that they have those love of the finer things, aristocratic, posh, fucking affectations like I do, and thus I would make a better vampire than I would date a vampire, usually. So I can't very well walk that back and then say, no, there's no connection between, or there's no parity or symmetry between gay stereotypes and vampire stereotypes, because there very obviously are. I still wouldn't call them relevant, and I think any person who is beginning their argument with parallels between gay and vampire mean that vampires are automatically gay is stupid, and I still think that identity is a poor basis for any rational argument. But if you're that sort of person, there is more meat on the bone, so to speak, with regards to the symmetry between gay stereotypes and vampire stereotypes than there would be in most of these sorts of arguments. Anyway, moving on.
From the seminal work Carmilla, Joseph Sheridan LeFang's 1872 novella, to Interview with the Vampire, to one of my favorite books, Carry On, vampires take on many of the same abuses that the gay community has historically suffered. Many portrayals treat vampirism as an acquired disease. See the AIDS crisis, which has killed roughly 44.1 million people to date, leaving characters to deal with self-hatred, despite the fact that anyone can become a vampire. Anyone can contract HIV.
I mean, that's a more historically recent example, but again, if you're the sort of person who is thematically inclined, I can sort of see the parallel. I just want to go back for a second and focus on something really stupid. The guy who wrote Kit Carmilla is literally named Li Fang.
LeFang.
I am yeah, I'm hoping to God that's a pen name, because if not, that is the greatest coincidence in literature history.
Well, no, his full name is Joseph Sheridan LaFang, which I
Yes.
assume is French.
So his name. So I'm hoping his name is a pen name because otherwise, the guy who's called LaFang making a vampire story is one of the greatest literary coincidences in history. And it is fucking hilarious. Either way, whether it's a pen name or not, it's fucking hilarious. the the very idea that someone called LaFang wrote a vampire story is hilarious to me.
Moving on.
Yeah. That's like Alucard levels of vampire reference. Are we sure the guy who wrote Camilla isn't literally a vampire? Sorry. It's like literally the kind of jokes that they would make in this world.
They're forced into the shadows, see the closet, and pushed to extreme levels of caution when it comes to who they can trust with their secrets. In love stories, vampires typically take on a single human source and must grapple with whether that person can be counted on to keep their confidence, their protection, and their hearts. After all, their societal safety depends on it.
Small freaking eyelash in your works here is that most vampire romances are between a male vampire and a female human, so that does sort of break the gay subtext a bit. Not saying there are no gay vampire romances. I mean, we just covered on my Smasher Pass or yeah, my Monster Mash Graveyard Smash list, or Orlok and Mizrak. So there are not zero gay vampire romances, but as a general rule, when vampire romances are involved, it's a male vampire and a female human. So that does sort of crap on any point you were going to make about gay or queer representation in vampires, which is another reason why I prefer not to think in thematic terms wherever possible. And even when I am thinking in thematic terms, I try to avoid any parallels with identity where possible. Moving on, though.
Disability. Vampires work especially well as a parallel for disability.
I am being called out, and it is insufferable.
They must keep to a specific rigorous diet to ensure their health. See diabetes, celiac, Crohn's, GERD, etc. Their environment exposure could lead to their deaths. See the COVID-19 crisis. They have a blood disorder. See sickle cell anemia or the aforementioned HIV.
Okay, I'm now going to out history you, and I'm going to take an immeasurable amount of pleasure in doing so. This goes to show how surface level your parallels are being here, because if you were looking for diseases that parallel vampirism, the first port of call was and always shall be probably porphyria, which, by the way, for those that don't know, porphyria is an allergy to vitamin D, which one of the quintessential sources of vitamin D is sunlight, and that's also one of the main ways in which your body produces it. So people with porphyria usually wind up being rather sun exposure or resistant to be exposed to the sun because it produces vitamin D, which their body can't process. And as a result, frequently vitamin D deficiency will result in things like their skin being closer to their bones, hair loss. It can even sometimes result in jaundice or other um, pigmentary issues, and it can frequently result in your eyes being bloodshot and your teeth, or rather the what's the word, gums. I don't know why that took me so long to figure out, but yeah, your gums can actually recede slightly from your teeth, which makes your teeth look bigger with porphyria. So yeah, if you were actually interested in vampirism as it pertains to disability, your first port of call should have immediately been porphyria. Literal allergy to the sun, almost. And it results in someone who can look very vampiric. It can also, interestingly, when it doesn't result in your hair falling out, it can sometimes result in your body overproducing hair to cover itself and protect itself from the sun. So it can also sometimes be a origin for vampire or not vampire, but werewolf or wolfman uh, imagery as well. Interestingly enough. Moving on.
Racism. Popular media has a startling lack of POC vampires, as though a lack of blood is equivalent to a lack of melanin. Can I
The
hold on? Can I start this?
Go ahead.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Uh, I get where they're coming from, and I wouldn't mind seeing like vampires from like ancient African, like ancient Africa or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But vampires are mostly, well, not mostly, but or creatures of. Don't get me wrong, there are creatures of similar style in various mythologies,
Mm-hmm.
but vampires themselves have mostly been a European uh, thing.
May I now do the rant that I was going to do?
Yes, basically, I was just kind of giving you a kind of more forward.
Okay. The practical reason why most vampires are portrayed as white is because vampires, typically in the modern zeitgeist, are corpsely pale. And it's a hell of a lot easier to portray someone as corpsely pale if they already have relatively pale skin. It's not impossible to make a black person look corpse pale, but it either is going to get a lot of race incentivized people mad at them because that would result in a black vampire skin lightening, which there's already a controversy in the black community a lot of times with regards to people whose skin is too light and therefore are white passing, or it's sometimes referred to as colorist. So yeah, the practical visual reason why quite a lot of vampires are European is because if your skin is already Caucasian, it's a hell of a lot easier to make it look unnaturally white, which is a visual signifier for vampires. Moving on.
Right. One. Okay. One could make the case that this is partially because so many cases of vampirism involving moving in darkness, ruined by exposure to the sun, sleeping in coffins. But it's not like POC magically turn white in the winter, and yet vampires are quite literally whitewashed. Okay, also, too much flat land in Africa, so vampires wouldn't really have places to stay. It's like,
Also, if we're really going to do this stupid game, melanin exists to protect someone from the sun. So unless you wanted to tell a story where black vampires were actually stronger than white vampires because they're more resistant to the sun, which honestly wouldn't be a bad premise for like a parody or something. But unless you wanted to make that allegory, which I suppose a bunch of the like Afrocentrists might like doing something like that. The issue is white people are more vulnerable to the sun because we don't fucking have melanin, because that's what melanin is for. It's to prevent your body from over absorbing sunlight. That's why people in Africa are dark skinned, because they're more frequently exposed to the sun, and therefore they need the melanin in their skin to not burn. Whereas Europeans are or were located in places that are very frequently overcast or where the sun doesn't shine very brightly, and as a result, someone from European extraction needs as much sunlight as they can get, because sunlight produces vitamin D and several other vital nutrients, and therefore it makes sense for someone in a European climate to have lighter skin so they can get as much exposure to the sun as they can, whereas dark skinned people are already overexposed to the sun and need to develop a defense against sunlight beaming down on them too much. Moving on.
Twilight has only one black vampire in the entire. Oh, and yet vampires are. Sorry, I read that wrong. And yet vampires are quite literally whitewashed. Twilight has exactly one black vampire in the entire series, and Eurocentrism runs rampant given the strong ties to Transylvania. In more
It's
sinister portrayals, vampires can represent the master race, stronger, faster, above humans.
I I mean, no one in history has ever made that parallel before, but go ahead, I suppose. Um, and this is just gonna be a reskin of my stop making supremacy stories with regards to people with superpowers rant. If vampires in like the Twilight sense existed, they would unironically be superior to normal humans because they are stronger, faster, more durable, and frequently can think faster because of the aforesaid super speed. So yeah, you can't really you can't really do a supremacy narrative where supremacy is wrong if the supremacy is true. One of the main problems with the Nazi ideology is there was no evidence that their supremacy bullshit was true. When you make these kind of arguments with somebody like Homelander from The Boys, however, he has a much stronger case to being superior now, doesn't he? And if someone was stupid enough to try to make a anti-white supremacist bullshit thing with vampires, you can't very much get away from the fact that most versions of vampires are in fact superior to humans. Doesn't mean they should identify with that superiority or that they should think that makes them more morally superior, but it's kind of hard to tell a supremacy is bad story if that supremacy is at least arguably true. Please stop doing it, social justice hacks. You are only hurting yourself, and you're pissing me off in the bargain. Granted, everything about social justice pisses me off, so your mileage may vary, I suppose. Yeah, but it's a lot harder to decry supremacy arguments when the supremacy argument is arguably true.
Okay, Leonard.
Yeah, moving on.
Okay, poverty. Vampires cannot live without human aid and are therefore seen as leeches to society. They get cast in the same light as conservatives would cast those on welfare and social services. Their need for community resources is deemed parasitic, and yet no one chooses to become a vampire, just like no one chooses to be born poor. Every major religion or morality system insists on the importance of caring for those with fewer resources. What vampires' needs, people are often too willing to give a helping hand. True Blood and Wayward Son, humans line up to go to vampire bars in the hopes of sharing their blood with a sexy stranger.
I have never in my life heard something so stupidly miss the point as the thing we just heard there. The reason why you heard me smack my face like 5 or 6 times there is because anyone who's ever read anything about vampires in the last 200 to 300 years can tell you vampires are almost always aristocrat coded, you ignorant fucks. You can't make a poverty argument with most vampires because most vampires are the aristocracy in fiction. Again, the level of psychotically like short-sighted cherry picking you would have to do to even think of vampires as poverty coded is baffling beyond fucking words. Honestly, vampires are almost always aristocracy coded. They pretty much can never, while being a traditional vampire, be synonymous with poverty unless you're doing a subversive, it's not how it is in most other versions of the story thing. But yeah, no, it is utterly fucked in the head to try to make poverty parallels with vampires because vampires are the aristocracy, generally speaking. Moving on.
Immigration. Vampires cannot enter a place they aren't welcome. They must be invited inside or they will be turned away. Watching these narratives play out on screen or dictate encourage female main characters like Suki Stouthouse to let her tormented love interest into her heart and home. In the Carry On series, we feel for Baz Pitch as he must remind his boyfriend to invite him into public places. Okay?
I suppose this is less stupid than the previous one, though literally an empty screen would be less stupid than the previous one, so low bar there. But yes, I suppose you could, in theory, frame that as a immigration story. You would be utterly fucked in the head and stupid to do so for the same reason as you would with every other form of identitarianism, but at least you'd be less stupid than the person who genuinely tried to argue that vampires are in any way a symbol of poverty. Fucking hell.
You done?
Yeah.
After this, we're probably going to have to call it.
Okay.
I'm like about ready to drift, man, so.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Each fictional world must establish their own rules for vampirism, and in doing so, they distinguish which story they want to tell along the way. While navigating the shadowy world of secrecy, they carefully select partners, struggle with the specificity of their health problems, and seek sanctuary. And in doing so, vampires can morph into representations of any number of societal issues.
Except poverty, except in the rarest and most counterintuitive of examples.
I think someone put it as a joke once in a YouTube short I watched. If you're living for over 100 years as a vampire, right?
And you haven't put at least some money away, then you're a moron. Yeah.
Now, why would you want to live poor?
Well,
As
that too. Not to mention that because of the aforesaid speed and strength and whatnot advantage, there's always the good old fashioned option of killing people and taking their shit, even if you yourself aren't smart enough to put a nest egg away. And hell, if a vampire's been alive for long enough, their day-to-day possessions can become first antiques and then like literal artifacts. Like a vampire that was bitten during the time of the Roman Empire could literally just save their pocket change from the Roman period and buy a mansion just on the back of one of those coins after a fashion. So yeah, if you are a vampire who's been alive for more than a few centuries and you're still scraping by, you need to mesmerize yourself and accountant Renfield is what you need to do.
Right. Okay. Alright, there's no point telling any story without humanizing the villain. Most vampires serve as love interest. We see them as sexy, brooding anti-heroes and creatures of unattainable beauty. To fall for a vampire, one must accept and embrace the aspects of them that set them apart. It's reframe their differences not as inherent faults, but as moral struggles, physical needs, and lifelong battles with loneliness caused by an individuality they never had a choice in. So why can't we do that for our fellow humans?
Okay, I don't really have much of a problem with the rest of that argument, but I fundamentally disagree with the starting premise. You do not have to humanize a villain to make them interesting. You just have to make them cool, or smart, or likable, or awesome, or funny, or intelligent, or like there are thousands upon thousands of ways to make a villain interesting without necessarily quote unquote humanizing them. You can also humanize them. I'm not saying that's an illegal move or anything, but saying that you have to humanize your villain in order to make them interesting is wrong, short-sighted, and stupid.
Okay. Oh, Jantrell says, wait, Don, I know a vampire you might like. That musically vampire Viking from Iron Druid.
Oh, Leaf. Yes, Leaf. Um, I could indeed have put Leaf on the list. Fuck me. Um, I I might actually have to No, I think I'd still put him in the honorable mentions category because I don't think no, he's like a 6'6" Viking dude, so maybe I could. But the question is, who would I? I guess I guess what I would do if I had remembered Leif Helgerson from Iron Druid is he would be in Matthew Claremont's place because yes, he is like a 6'6" Viking dude, and he does have a code of honor and shit. So yes, if he hit on me, provided I could convince him not to turn me, if he hit on me, I probably would not kick him out of bed. So yes, consider my list amended. Put Leif Helgerson from Iron Druid in Matthew Claremont's place.
It's very turtle. Humans are also rather monstrous a lot of the time, and not always for any good or understandable reasons.
This is also true. Kind of nihilistic, but it's at least arguable. Um, but yeah, yeah, you definitely don't need to humanize a villain in order to make them interesting. Very often, what you need to do to make a villain interesting is just make them have fun being evil, and that's sometimes enough to make a villain likable or interesting. Usually, in fact, a villain is more likely to um, be more interesting than the hero because a paragon hero is frequently about self-denial or self-limitation, whereas a villain in like the most classical of modes is all about indulgence and occasionally like being spiteful or getting back at the people who you think have wronged you. So yeah, in the most like classical villain formulation, like an Ursula or a Scar or a Maleficent, you just have to make them like unrepentantly evil enough and indulgent enough, and half your work is already done, pretty much. Not saying you can't also make humanized villains, it's just it's false to say that you have to humanize a villain to make them interesting. If anything, the modern obsession with like Wicked syndrome demonstrates that, because that's like the default setting in Hollywood now, and there are so many examples of someone trying their damnedest to humanize a villain, and all it does is backfire on them. The quintessential example is probably the evil queen or Rumpelstiltskin from Once Upon a Time, who are much more interesting when they're let be evil for evil's sake than they are when the fucking Doofenshmirtzy and emotionally scarring backstories start happening. Moving on, though.
Uh, 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 sorry. Uh, why do we look at disabled people and deem their needs as unworthy of attention? Why do we treat black people who are so much more likely to develop sickle cell so badly in the medical system when we can look at Edward Cullen and feel bad for his fight? Why do we look at people with celiacs and assume they're faking gluten intolerance out of some false sense of individuality? What is an eternal battle with one's body if not chronic pain?
Okay, two things. Fuck you, once again, not your shield. Secondly, the main reason why people have a difficult time empathizing with disabled people, I have found, is precisely people like the person who wrote this article. I've gone through this again. I have gone through this in the past, but I will go through it again because I need it for catharsis' sake. There is a fundamental difference between pity and sympathy. Pity is something that alleged superiors give to their inferiors. Sympathy is a camaraderie shared by people who live shoulder to shoulder or are equals. Sympathy is a camaraderie shared between equals. Pity is a condescending, belittling pseudo morality that people who think themselves superior extend to their inferiors. And if there is an ideology more based on pity than social justice, I will eat my fucking hat. And by the way, that condescending, I'm better than you, but at least I'm nice to you, therefore I can feel less guilty about thinking myself better than you thing, that is one of the main reasons I am an asshole. Because when you're a disabled person growing up, and every person gives that same belittling smile of super niceness so that I don't have to feel guilty about thinking myself superior to you, that shit, that makes you not trust people. When every person's smile is fake and hides fucking a knife in it, you start to really, really, really not like fucking people and find it very, very hard to find people who like you as a person and not just as their token disabled friend. So, yeah, no, if you want to know the real answer as to why people find it hard to relate to people with disabilities, then you need to look in the fucking mirror because it's pitying, morally stultifying, infantilizing bullshit from people like you who think that because they treat the people they find to be inferior to them better than they treat normal people, that means they're a good person. It's contempt masquerading as morality, and I am beyond fucking enraged by it. That is my default response to pity. My default response to pity is, was, and always has been contempt. It's one of the reasons why I'm such an asshole. Because I'm sick to death of people's backhanded way of saying they're a good person because they think themselves superior. But at least they treat the people they think inferior to themselves better than they treat normal people. That must make it okay, right? No, fuck off. Sorry. That triggers me. People like this thinking they're good people while simultaneously like creating a moral caste system in their heads. It just it enrages me so much. Moving on.
Well, I know which one of us is the token in our friendship.
You're too unique to be a token. Don't do that to yourself.
Well, I'm the fucking straight guy.
No, I have a lot of straight friends. that's not what makes our friendship work as well as it does.
Uh, shit. Okay, hold on. All right, yeah, no. Why do we make laws that keep queer and trans people from that which would be life affirming to them? How can we accept the way that the LGBTQ plus community is continually bullied out of public spaces while we thirst over Louis and Lestat?
Here we go again. My sister in humanity, I suppose, for lack of a better connection point. If you want these people to be treated well, if you want them to be regarded as the same as everybody else, if you want them to be regarded as people, treat them treat them as a person, not as an interchangeable engine part in a fucking identitarian hive mind. That would do wonders for all of the aforementioned. If you treated disabled people not as their disability attached to a person, but as the person who has the disability, if you treated gay people not as a sexuality that happens to be attached to a body, but instead as a person with their own fucking mind and agency and individual fucking sense of self, you would solve almost all of the aforesaid problems. Please, for the love of God, stop framing the contempt you hold people not like you to as if it makes you moral. You're not moral just because you treat the people you think of as inferior to yourself better than you treat normal people. All that does is change the problem from negative discrimination to positive discrimination, and I'm fucking sick of it. If you don't see me as a person and you instead see my sexuality and my disability that happens to be attached to my body, and I'm secretly an interchangeable engine part in an ideological hive mind, you can fuck right off. Because that shit is born from pity, and I am not going to deal with anyone who can't at least be made to understand the difference between pity and sympathy. Pity is again the indulgence that an allegedly superior person offers to their inferior. Sympathy is a camaraderie shared between equals. And frankly, the person who gives me sympathy rather than pity will always be better in my estimation, because I don't think you should be allowed to frame your contempt for your inferiors as moral just because your solution is, but I treat the people I define as inferior better than I treat the people I define as equal, therefore I must be a good person. No, that's just pathological altruism and it makes me fucking sick. Moving on.
Alright. What are we doing denying refugees asylum and watching ICE raids when we understand how heartbreaking it is to watch the scene where the couple fights and the human love interest weaponizes their partner's vampirism by physically refusing to let their partner into their home?
Honey, the reason why we don't connect those things is because those instances you mentioned are individual characters having individual problems unique to those characters. An individual is not a collective. This shouldn't need to be said. But because your brain is hog fucked to death on social justice, I will spell it out for you. An individual being is not a series of beings. Even vampires, who there's always the sort of hierarchy in the like um the hierarchy of master vampires and subordinate thralls and so on. Even in those circumstances, an individual character is not meant to be every person who ever had that identity category or that list of identity categories. An individual is an individual, and thus most people who haven't been pathologically collectivized in the name of social justice treat individual characters the same way they treat individual people and associate that person's struggles with that person and their struggles, not every person who has ever shared that person's identity categories. This would also be very helpful if you could stop doing. Moving on.
All right. Um, why do we allow neo-Nazis to spout master race propaganda and white supremacy when we can so obviously identify it in narratives where vampires are cast as unambiguous villains? Just like vampires, conservatism is on the rise, not only in this country but globally. As our future storytellers establish their own lore Bibles, I can only hope that they choose their themes wisely.
Honey, there aren't that many neo-Nazis. This is a vanishingly rare minority within a vanishingly rare minority, and the fact that you just conflated neo-Nazism with conservatism tells me everything I could possibly ever want to know about you. You ironically have been mind fucked by a vampiric disease, and that disease is social justice.
Okay. Before we sign off, Judge Last Day, weird question, his words. If you guys could, would you start a hive mind creating obedient drones? Since I imagine other options you guys would hate, simulate you retaining control, or melting pot.
It's always going to be the melting pot for me. I, I don't even like a lot of what goes on in my head most of the time. I'm certainly not going to inflict that on other people.
Melting pot. Would that be like similar to Remick and the vampires in Sinners?
I assume so, although I don't know if Dragon Turtle has watched Sinners yet. If
Well,
not, DT, watch Sinners. It's a very, very fucking good movie.
yeah. But obviously, what I mean is like a shared knowledge of experience gets passed through each individual as the connection is made.
I mean,
Like,
doing it that way, I wouldn't mind necessarily, as long as it didn't overwrite any of the existing experiences.
okay, melting pot. The hive is an amalgamation of everyone in it.
Yeah, I'd much rather do it that way than the fucking like the hierarchical hive mind. If nothing else, that leaves you open to being vulnerable to anyone who happens to join the like. Okay, this unironically happened in Carpe Jugulum, um, which is a novel in the Discworld series, um, which is of course their take on vampires. If the title Carpe Jugulum didn't give it away, Carpe Diem of course being seize the day, Carpe Jugulum therefore being seize the throat. Um, but in that Discworld book, uh, basically what Granny Weatherwax does, because of course Granny Weatherwax has to one up a master vampire, instead of trying to fight um, the vampire mind to mind like she normally does, because she's very good at mind stuff, she she does this technique called borrowing. Borrowing in the Discworld is when you send your own mind or awareness out in the subconscious mind of another being. Um, but rather than borrow into another being, Granny Weatherwax borrows into her own blood, so that when the vampire tries to bite her and turn her into a vampire, instead of that, what happens is the vampires get weatherwaxed instead of Granny Weatherwax becoming a vampire. She Uno reverses the vampirism because the vampire mind is too strong for her to battle against in a straight on fight. So instead, she borrows into her own blood, knowing that the vampire is going to bite her, wanting to turn her into a vampire, and as a result, the vampire ends up letting Granny Weatherwax into the vampire hive mind, and she destroys him from within. It's hilarious.
All right. Well, with that, folks, I want to say goodbye. Adios. Aloha. Avideze. Sayonara. Peace. Cheers. And
Shalom, and fuck off. Good
hold on.
evening, everyone.
Wait. Janitor just asked the question. Uh, was it temporary or is the weather waxing permanent? Would she still be a witch if she is a vampire? Is it a hive mind?
Okay, so the way it's described in Discworld is witches would still retain all their abilities as witches, as vampires, and it would in fact make them incredibly strong vampires. But because of the innately dark nature of vampires, it would result in that witch becoming a dark witch by definition. Um, there's actually a scene in Carpe Jugulum where um, Granny Weatherwax is having to fight off the vampire infection and sort of assert her own dominance against the vampire infection, which forces her to um, shun her own darker tendencies because if she was too weak to embrace the darkness, she would have lost the power struggle and she would have gotten vampired anyway. But because she manages to stay connected to sort of the light side of witchcraft, um, she ends up maintaining her own personality against the vampire struggle, and therefore the vampires get weatherwaxed. But yes, the weatherwaxing is temporary because um, after the vampires that are the main source of the problem get killed by their father, because it's a family of vampires that's of issue in Carpe Jugulum. After they get dispatched by their father for misbehaving, she promises to remove her weatherwaxing, which I
Uh,
almost wonder how long she could have kept it going if she hadn't like said uncle for the sake of politeness. How long she could have kept it going?
okay.
Presumably not forever because she did say doing it cost her something, so there would have been a limitation to it anyway,
Dalton?
I guess. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm on the.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, we're gonna call it there, folks. Sorry, but
Shalom and fuck off. We will see you in the next one where things will presumably get hairy. But tish.
see you guys.